It was a sweltering afternoon on the outskirts of Austin, and Highway 83 hummed with the usual weekday traffic. Cars moved in their steady rhythm until something caused a ripple. A sudden stop, then more brakes squealing. Drivers leaned out of their windows, confused, expecting maybe a deer, a tire in the road, or some kind of roadside hazard. But what had brought everything to a halt wasn't something anyone expected. In the very center of the highway stood a small, fluffy bobcat kitten. She was no bigger than a house cat, with spotted fur and bright, golden eyes that looked out at the cars as though she were searching for someone. Most animals in her situation would run. The noise alone was overwhelming. Honking, engines, shouting. But not this one. She didn't flinch. She didn't bolt into the woods. Instead, she stood perfectly still, looking back and forth at the vehicles, and then taking slow, careful steps toward one of them. Her movements weren't aggressive or panicked. They seemed purposeful. Officer Sarah Winters had just wrapped up a roadside inspection nearby when the dispatch came through. Unusual animal activity, possible hazard, the report read. She figured it was a stray dog, or maybe a raccoon digging through someone's roadside trash. Nothing she hadn't seen a dozen times before. But when she pulled onto the highway and saw the wall of stopped cars, she knew it was something different. The other drivers pointed toward the middle of the road, and that's when she saw the little bobcat. She stepped out of her patrol car slowly, trying not to scare the animal off. But again, the kitten didn't run. It turned toward her, stared for a long moment, then took a few more steps in her direction. Sarah couldn't believe it. She had worked in law enforcement for over a decade and had never seen a wild cat act like this. It was as if the kitten was trying to communicate something. As she moved closer, she noticed something else. The animal had a small device strapped to its leg. That wasn't normal. Wild bobcats didn't wear gear like that. Kneeling carefully, Sarah got just close enough to see it clearly. It was a tracking device, but not the kind used by animal control. This one looked modified, something designed to send coordinates. On it was a bright blue tag, scratched but readable. Numbers and letters were etched into it, like a hiker's emergency marker. That's when the first chill ran down her spine. This wasn't just a wild bobcat wandering out of the forest. This little creature was trying to get someone's attention. Sarah stood up slowly and reached for her radio, heart pounding now for an entirely different reason. What if this wasn't a strange animal encounter at all? What if it was the start of something much bigger, something that no one, especially not her, could have predicted? Sarah's mind raced as she stood beside the highway, the heat of the Texas sun baking the asphalt beneath her boots. Around her, confused drivers remained in their vehicles, now watching from a distance as she examined the small bobcat. Its presence was puzzling, but the real mystery was the device strapped to its leg. It clearly hadn't been placed by any official wildlife department. She had seen the collars used for tracking large animals before. Bulky, made for the neck, and with clear identification. But this was different. This was smaller, sleeker, and appeared homemade. It looked like someone had improvised, and the bright blue tag with engraved numbers didn't just seem out of place. It screamed that there was a human behind this. With traffic rerouted and backup on the way, Sarah knew she couldn't just wait around. She retreated to her patrol car and began scanning the regional wildlife registry, trying to match the serial number on the tag to anything in the system. But no matches came up. Then, cross-referencing with state park emergency records, a hit finally came through. The number on the tag matched a location marker registered to a missing hiker named Robert Whitley. He had checked into Fortress Ridge State Park for a solo wilderness trek just over a day ago and never checked back out. His last known position placed him deep in the wilderness, miles away from the nearest trailhead. Suddenly, the Bobcat's strange behavior began to make sense. It wasn't lost. It was trying to lead someone, anyone, to its human companion. The idea seemed almost unbelievable. Could this tiny wild animal be guiding them intentionally? Could it actually understand that help was needed? The rational side of Sarah's mind pushed back, reminding her that animals didn't think like people. But something about this kitten defied explanation. It had approached the highway and waited for someone to notice, and it hadn't run when people tried to approach. Instead, it had sought her out, as though it could tell she was the one who could do something. She made the call to Fish and Wildlife, asking for immediate support. Within the hour, a pickup truck rolled up behind her cruiser. Dr. Stephen Mitchell, a longtime biologist from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, stepped out. His experience working with big cats and other wildlife was unmatched, and if anyone could shed light on this mystery, it was him. Together they approached the Bobcat again. The little creature didn't run. It waited, pacing slowly, tail twitching with what looked like impatience. Then, without warning, it turned and started walking toward the woods, stopping every few feet to glance back. Sarah and Stephen followed at a distance, their boots crunching the dry brush as they crossed the highway and slipped into the shade of the tree-lined. The further they walked, the more convinced Sarah became that this was no random detour. The Bobcat had a purpose, and somewhere ahead, hidden in the vast wilderness, someone's life might depend on them realizing it in time. The deeper they ventured into the dense underbrush, the more Sarah's thoughts swirled with questions and uncertainties. The Bobcat, small, agile, and unafraid, led them along an old game trail that wound through thick trees and rocky outcrops. Sarah had worked in law enforcement for years, but this was unlike any search mission she had ever been on. The Bobcat seemed purposeful in its movements, and its constant glances back toward her and Stephen made it clear that it wanted them to follow. As they walked, the sound of the woods slowly enveloped them. Birds chirped high above, and the distant rush of a stream could be heard faintly in the background. Despite the natural beauty around them, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of urgency. What if they were too late? What if Robert Whitley had already succumbed to whatever had happened to him out here? The Bobcat paused at the edge of a steep ravine, its body tense as it peered down into the deep gorge below. Sarah and Stephen stopped just behind it, both of them feeling the weight of the moment settle in. There, at the bottom of the ravine, partly concealed beneath a fallen tree, was a human figure. It wasn't moving much, but Sarah could make out the faint rise and fall of the figure's chest. Relief surged through her, but so did a pang of anxiety. The person down there needed help, and fast. The Bobcat didn't hesitate. It moved closer to the edge, its golden eyes locked on the figure below. Sarah and Stephen exchanged a look, then carefully made their way toward the ravine. The descent was tricky, steep and uneven, but with careful steps, they made it down to the bottom. As they approached the fallen tree, Sarah's breath caught in her throat when she saw the man clearly. His face was pale, his lips cracked, and his leg was pinned under a large branch. But he was alive. Weak, but alive. "Robert Whitley," Sarah called out, her voice a mix of relief and professional calm. The man stirred, his eyes fluttering open. With effort, he raised one arm slightly, as if to wave, his face a mixture of pain and gratitude. "Alive," Sarah muttered under her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at Stephen, who nodded grimly. "Alive," he repeated, confirming the obvious but no less important truth. They had found him. The Bobcat, Nova, stayed close, her body brushing against Robert's side. She nuzzled him gently, as though offering comfort in a way only an animal could. Sarah could see the bond between the two, a bond that went beyond mere survival instincts. This Bobcat wasn't just an animal. She had been Robert's companion, his partner in the wild, and had saved his life by leading them here. Sarah quickly radioed in the coordinates to dispatch, requesting immediate medical assistance. The situation was urgent, and they needed the extraction team to get to them as soon as possible. Stephen crouched down beside Robert, assessing his injuries. A quick check confirmed a compound fracture in the man's leg. He also showed signs of dehydration and exhaustion, but despite the obvious pain he was in, Robert was still conscious and aware. Sarah knelt down beside the Bobcat, who remained steadfast at Robert's side, as though unwilling to leave him. The bond between them was undeniable. It wasn't just a pet and its owner. It was something more. The fact that Nova had sought out help, leading them to Robert, was beyond what Sarah could have imagined. It was almost as if Nova had known exactly what needed to be done, and had done it without hesitation. Minutes passed, like hours, as they worked to stabilize Robert as best they could, giving him water and assessing his wounds. Nova watched the proceedings intently, her eyes flicking between Sarah and Robert, a silent observer, but also an essential part of the rescue. When Sarah finally stood and turned to radio the rescue team again, Nova took one last look at Robert, then turned back to the forest as though she knew her job was done. The stillness of the moment was broken only by the sound of their radio crackling to life again. The rescue team was on their way, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to breathe, her eyes momentarily meeting the Bobcat's. In that brief exchange, Sarah felt an unspoken understanding between them, as if Nova knew the danger had passed and their work had been completed. As the medical team arrived, the tension in the air began to dissipate, though it was replaced by a different kind of intensity, one of urgency and professionalism. The rescue team swiftly set to work, preparing the stretcher and the necessary equipment for Robert's extraction. Sarah stood to the side, watching as the skilled team members moved with precision, working together to ensure Robert's safety while navigating the treacherous ravine. Despite his injuries, Robert remained conscious, offering a weak smile and reassuring nods as they carefully immobilized his leg. Nova, ever watchful, had not moved from Robert's side. She lingered, her presence calming, but also a quiet testament to the extraordinary bond she shared with the man. Sarah observed the Bobcat's behavior with a mix of awe and respect. There was something deeply moving about Nova's unwavering loyalty to Robert, a silent testament to the bond they had built over the years. It wasn't just a partnership of survival. It was something more profound, something that transcended the usual boundaries between humans and animals. As the stretcher was lifted and secured, Nova let out a soft sound, her eyes locked on Robert. There was a tinge of distress in her gaze, though it was brief, quickly replaced by a quiet understanding. She seemed to know that Robert was being taken to safety, that help had arrived. Yet, Sarah noticed, the Bobcat didn't step forward to follow. Instead, Nova remained in place, watching as the team began to ascend the ravine with Robert. The weight of what had just transpired was not lost on Sarah. She had seen plenty of rescues in her career, but none quite like this. The idea of an animal playing such a crucial role in saving a human's life was rare, almost unheard of. It wasn't just the fact that Nova had led them to Robert's location. It was the way she had done it with such determination, such clear intent. It was as if the Bobcat had known exactly what needed to happen and had carried out the mission without a second thought. As the team moved back up the slope, Sarah felt a sudden pang of gratitude for the Bobcat. She had seen so much of the world from her position as an officer, but this was different. This was a reminder of the deep, often mysterious connections that existed between humans and animals, connections that went far beyond mere survival. It was the kind of partnership that left an indelible mark on anyone who witnessed it. The journey back to the clearing was quiet, the sense of accomplishment palpable in the air. Robert, though clearly exhausted and in pain, was safe, and that was the most important thing. Sarah and Stephen took a moment to reflect on how close they had come to losing him, and how, in the most unlikely of ways, a Bobcat had made the difference. As the extraction team loaded Robert into the ambulance, Sarah turned to find Nova still standing at the edge of the ravine, watching them with those sharp, knowing eyes. She had done her part. Now it was time for her to return to her own life, back to the forest, back to the wild. But Sarah couldn't help but wonder, what would happen to the Bobcat now? What would her future look like after having played such a pivotal role in saving a human life? The thought lingered with Sarah as the ambulance drove away, carrying Robert to safety. Nova, however, had already begun to disappear back into the trees, her spotted coat blending seamlessly with the natural landscape. She wasn't just a wild animal anymore. She was something more, something that had bridged the gap between the human world and the wilderness in a way no one could have predicted. And as Sarah stood there, watching the last traces of Nova vanish into the distance, She felt a deep sense of gratitude for having been part of this extraordinary moment, this unlikely rescue. In the weeks that followed, the story of Robert Whitley and Nova, the bobcat who had saved his life, began to capture the attention of the world. What started as a simple life-or-death rescue turned into a tale of unprecedented partnership between man and animal. As news outlets picked up the story, the public fascination with the bobcat grew. People were drawn to the unlikely hero, a wild animal with the intelligence and courage to assist in a human rescue. Soon, Nova was a local celebrity, her story becoming a symbol of the extraordinary things that could happen when humans and wildlife worked together. The spotlight was not easy for Robert. While he appreciated the attention it brought to wildlife conservation, he couldn't shake the feeling that Nova was the true stars of the show. The world wanted to know more about this remarkable bobcat, her instincts, her training, and the bond she shared with him. But for Robert, it was never about fame. It was about the deeper connection he had forged with Nova, a bond that ran far beyond what anyone could understand. He had trained her to navigate the wilderness, to trust her instincts, but he'd also seen her grow into something greater, a symbol of the potential for wild animals to interact with humans in meaningful ways. As the days passed, Sarah's involvement in the story didn't end with the rescue. The emotional impact of the event lingered with her. She couldn't shake the image of Nova, standing at the edge of the ravine, her eyes filled with a mix of anxiety and hope. It was as if the bobcat understood that the rescue wasn't just about finding Robert. It was about saving him, and in some strange, beautiful way, it was about saving herself, too. She had crossed the boundary between wild and human, performing an act of compassion that no one had expected. Sarah knew she had to go back to the center where Robert worked. She had to understand more about Nova and her remarkable role in the world. The visit wasn't just a chance to follow up on the story. It was a chance to delve deeper into the bond between animal and human. Robert had been rehabilitating animals for years, but there was something different about Nova, something that set her apart from the others. She wasn't just another wild animal that had been rescued and rehabilitated. She was an ambassador, a bridge between two worlds. When Sarah arrived at the Wildlife Center, she was struck by how much it had changed since the rescue. The center had grown, and now, thanks to the attention Nova had brought, they were able to expand their work, helping even more animals who couldn't be returned to the wild. Robert was there, his leg healed, his role in the conservation effort more vital than ever. He had dedicated his life to rehabilitating wildlife, but now he had a new purpose: to share the story of Nova and what she had taught him about the complex relationship between humans and the wild. As Robert led Sarah to the enclosure where Nova was spending her days, she could see the pride in his eyes. Nova was thriving, and her presence was helping to educate people about the importance of wildlife preservation. Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the sight of the bobcat, lounging in the sun, her spotted coat blending beautifully with the natural environment. It was a testament to the extraordinary things that could happen when humans took the time to understand and respect the intelligence of wild animals. Nova's story had come full circle, and as Sarah watched her interact with visitors, her heart swelled with emotion. The bobcat, who had once been lost and frightened, running from a storm, was now a beacon of hope for wildlife conservation. Nova had saved Robert, but in doing so, she'd also changed the way the world viewed the relationship between humans and animals. The line between wild and tame had never been so blurred, and thanks to Nova's journey, people were beginning to see that animals were far more complex than they had ever imagined. As the day wore on and the visitors began to leave, Sarah stood with Robert, watching Nova from a distance. The connection she felt to the bobcat was undeniable, and she realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. Nova had changed so many lives, including hers, and the legacy of that extraordinary rescue would continue to inspire people for years to come. Sarah couldn't help but smile as she watched Nova rise from her perch and walk gracefully into the trees, a creature that had bridged two worlds in the most unexpected and beautiful way.